While some try to rate wars based on the number of dead, others examine the social, environmental, and political turmoil that occurs with prolonged battle. And of course, there's the financial expense. Here are the top 10 most expensive American wars. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Number 10. Spanish-American War. Sensationalized journalism, widely regarded as the first media war, helped fuel support for America's involvement in Cuba's struggle for independence from Spain. When the USS Maine, which had been dispatched to Havana to protect American interests, blew up unexpectedly in 1898, calls for American intervention grew louder. Congress officially declared war under the context of the Monroe Doctrine, which prohibited European intervention in the Western Hemisphere. Worldwide, U.S. forces crushed Spanish forces. The war cost $10.33 billion, and the United States acquired control of the Pacific islands of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. As a result of the war, America emerged as a global force. Number 9. American Civil War. The Civil War was fought mostly in the South, primarily on the issues of slavery and states' rights. The fight began in 1861 when South Carolina seceded from the Union. The war destroyed most of the South and devastated the region for years. In addition to well-known battles such as Antietam, Bull Run, and Gettysburg, there was guerrilla warfare in border states and areas of conflict involving civilians. The Civil War brought an end to the South's plantation system and the institution of slavery. The failed attempt by Confederate states to split from the Union cost them $22.99 billion. Number 8. American Civil War Union. For decades, the long-accepted Civil War death toll had been around 620,000. However, research published in 2011 by historian J. David Hacker elevated that figure to 750,000, by far the greatest of any U.S. combat. The conflict, which began in 1861, was fought over slavery and states' rights problems. 4 years later, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. By that time, the Union had spent $68.17 billion to keep the intact states united and end slavery. Number 7. Persian Gulf War. The Persian Gulf War, one of the shortest hostilities in American history, cost only $116.6 billion, or 0.3% of the country's GDP in 1991. When Iraqi ruler Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in August 1990, tensions in the Middle East rose. Despite United Nations appeals for Iraq to evacuate, Hussein refused. A few months later, Operation Desert Storm was launched by a vast U.S.-led coalition that included NATO allies and Middle Eastern states such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia. In February 1991, the attack lasted only 42 days and ended in disaster for Iraq. Hussein pledged to acknowledge Kuwait's sovereignty and eliminate his stockpiles of WMDs such as nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Hussein, though, stayed in power. Number 6. World War I. The United States was eventually drawn into the battle, owing primarily to Germany's use of unrestricted submarine warfare against all ships destined for countries it was fighting. When British intelligence uncovered a conversation between German diplomats and Mexican envoys proposing an alliance between the two countries if the U.S. entered the war against Germany, America was forced to act. On April 2, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. World War I ended 19 months later with over 116,000 troops killed. The war ultimately cost the United States $381.8 billion. Number 5. Korean War. The North Korean forces, aided by the Soviet Union, crossed the 38th parallel, which separated North and South Korea in June 1950. That triggered the Korean War. General Douglas MacArthur, on the other hand, pursued the North Koreans to the Yalu River, which established China's northern boundary with the Korean peninsula. The Chinese saw MacArthur's actions as an act of war and joined the war, forcing United Nations soldiers down the peninsula. After Dwight Eisenhower became president and promised to deploy nuclear weapons if the North Koreans or Chinese did not accept the 38th parallel as a border between the two countries, the war ended. The Korean War ultimately cost the United States $389.81 billion and around 36,000 deaths. Number 4. Vietnam War. The Vietnam War cost the U.S. $843.63 billion in 2019 or 2.3% of GDP in 1968. By the end of the war, the names of almost 58,000 deceased troops had been inscribed on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. The Geneva Accords specified that elections in the South be held the next year after the Vietnamese defeated the French in 1954, bringing an end to a cruel era of colonialism. The United States, determined not to allow communism to expand, backed Ngo Dinh Diem, a French-educated Catholic politician in South Vietnam. Diem had been assassinated by the time the United States sent troops in 1965. And Vietnamese support for the new military-led South Vietnamese government had waned. Number 3. War in Afghanistan. Since 2001, the United States has been engaged in an ongoing conflict in Afghanistan. Following the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the United States invaded Central Asia to force out the reigning Taliban, which offered a haven for al-Qaeda, the terrorist group responsible for the 9/11 attacks. Despite this, the U.S. military has been unable to establish Afghanistan as a stable, safe environment in the 17 years since the war began. Number 2. Iraq War. The Iraq War has cost the United States approximately $1 trillion. In 2003, U.S. troops invaded Iraq and deposed Saddam Hussein, believing he possessed weapons of mass destruction. Elections in Iraq, as well as training military personnel to assist stabilize the region, are regarded as accomplishments by the U.S. government. Nonetheless, the country remains scarred by violence and terror. Number 1. World War II. World War II cost the United States more than $4 trillion, or 36% of its GDP. During the war to defeat Nazi Germany, Italy, and the Japanese Empire, over 400,000 U.S. troops were slain. The United States formally entered the war on December 8, 1941, the day after the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor. The European War ended in May 1945, and Japan surrendered in August 1945 after the United States detonated nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged from World War II as the world's two greatest nations and became Cold War adversaries. So guys, that was it for this video. What did you think about our video? Let us know in the comments section below. If you are new to our channel, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell to get notified about our latest videos. Thanks for watching.